Thank you. I'm very happy to be talking here. So I'm presenting this on behalf of myself and my co-authors, Adam Grogan and Jayanthi Callum. In 2019, all three of us were working in one way or another with the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council. Both of them were board members. And Adam is with the RSPCA and Jayanthi is with the Avian and Reptile Rescue Trust, which is called ARC. So go back and forth between those. And we, as wildlife rehabilitators, so to set a little bit of the stage, what we do as wildlife rehabilitators is we take care of injured and orphaned animals and ill animals. The goal is to resolve whatever issues are going on and get them back into the wild as successful members of the wild ecosystem. A lot of other things we do as well. And one of those of what I'm going to talk about is just our interface with people while we're doing all of this work. So I have here conflict scenarios, and obviously there's a lot of interactions that are not conflict, but often when wildlife rehabilitators get called in, they're perceived as conflicts, even if they are not actually, in truth, a conflict. So intentional use of that term there. And I have listing some of the different interactions that happen where wildlife rehabilitators are called in. One thing I want to really point out with this is that conflict issues are going both ways. You know, they're injurious to humans, they're injurious to wildlife, sometimes much more on one side than the other, but it's unfortunately a multi-directional street. And the causes, at least the causes where wildlife rehabilitators are often getting brought in on an individual basis from members of the public versus from members of the government, is usually either a lack of understanding of the role of wildlife in their area, often combined with close proximity to wildlife, especially in peri-urban habitats. So that kind of sets the stage for when wildlife rehabilitators are getting involved. There's a lot of expectations of people doing wildlife rehabilitation. An expectation that we are going to save them all. Not gonna happen, unfortunately. Expectation that we're pest control. And overall, this expectation that we are going to make the issue go away. So why do we get it? That's why they involve us. Why do we get involved? Well, number one, it's a welfare issue. Animals are compromised during these human-wildlife interactions. A lot of them are caused by misconstrued perceptions, anthropomorphic views. We want to be working in tandem with the larger wildlife community to communicate better what actually is going on. So wildlife rehabilitators work within the community and usually are members of the community. They've got local knowledge, rehabilitators have local context. They are a bridge between wildlife scientists, policymakers, and the public. So up here I have just a couple of different signs from all three of our organizations that's kind of a more mass communication to the public service announcements, which the goal of all these really is to keep animals from getting in contact, getting involved in conflict with people, keeping them out in the wild and doing well, letting people know how their actions have quite a few effects. So the role of wildlife rehabilitators, we're first responders. We're triage for the animals, but we're also first responders for the humans in many situations. One of our big goals is preventing escalation. We shape attitudes. We want to create empathy toward the animal, toward the situation. We want to create understanding. So a lot of that goes into identifying what the actual problem is. So when we're talking to people, often our first communications are over the phone. So we're deflecting and delaying maybe we need some more time to understand the situation better, or even to get out there and observe it ourselves. But we're staying connected while we're delaying. And again, like I said earlier, we're empathizing and then educating. We plan ahead. We're providing both quick solutions to the immediate problem, but ideally, we're providing these longer-term solutions. And in fact, wildlife rehabilitators tend to apply the international consensus principles for ethical wildlife management. There's a paper by Sarah Dubois and a huge, wonderful list of people on this. And Adam Grogan is going to be talking about that tomorrow at 2, I think. But it is a big, I didn't realize till I was reading it, but it's like, yeah, that is exactly what we do. So to illustrate all this a little bit more, I have a case study from Jayanthi Center. So Jayanthi runs ARC in Bengaluru, India. Her center rescued 6,000 animals in 2022, so it gives you a little bit of a context there. And actually, I want to just point out that 2,000 of those animals were from one particular human-wildlife interaction, and I think conflict is a good word, which is the use of manga and the kite flying with glass-coated strings. So they had about 2,000 of the 6,000 animals that actually were admitted, not just calls they had, came from that particular case. But we aren't going to talk about that today. We're talking about bats. So concern about bats escalated really early on, actually, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Jay's center saw an increase in calls from people about bats, all wildlife living near them, but especially bats. And at that early stage of the pandemic, as you might imagine, taking calls at the Wildlife Center was even more challenging than the usual difficult task of communicating with people. People were not calm and reasonable. They were trying to stay protected while not having a lot of information and very little control over the situation. So why the conflict with bats, other than some of the things that are probably obvious to everyone in this room with COVID and bats and communication about the pandemic? But also it occurred not long after a local Nipah outbreak in the region, and that had already escalated concerns about bats. There were individuals actively demonizing bats, spreading misinformation. The image you see up here actually is a later image as well, but something in the popular press, this one from the New Indian Express, that's kind of very graphic, kind of saying bats are the problem. So as well as these zoonotic concerns, people would call worrying that bats would suck their blood, even though there weren't any vampire bats in the area. For whatever reason, those calls escalated at the same time, or that the presence of the bats would make their animals sick, their pets sick. So we're dealing with people who cared deeply, people who care aggressively, people who consider wildlife a nuisance or even harmful, and people who already know the answer and are pushing their agenda. But regardless of where they're coming from, these are all people with strong emotions, with strong opinions. They are calling into the wildlife rehabilitator because they care about the situation. There's a lot going on here. So the role of the wildlife rehabilitator, before anything else, is to listen, to actively listen. Reassure the person that we're there for them and the animals. We're caring about their health and safety as well as that of the wildlife, really setting the tone. And as we're listening and asking a few active questions to help understand better, we're understanding their position and exploring how they reached it. Maybe digging really in to figure out what is the real problem. What's the crux of the issue? And our goal is to be a community partner. As wildlife rehabilitators, we do not want to be the bad guy. We want to set up a situation where they're going to reach out to us again, where they see us as an ally who can help. At the same time, we're working with governments and with researchers. We want to have the best available information ourselves, and we also want to be able to communicate that out with the public and share the information we have. And I think one of the really important things is that policymakers, researchers, wildlife rehabilitators, and all the other practitioners are sharing similar messages. And that's why conferences like this are so important. So my next slide, for whatever reason, isn't showing up, but it's a lot of pretty posters from ARC with great messaging. I suggest going to their Facebook page and to talk about it a little bit is just wildlife rehabilitation gives direct aid. We are doing advocacy, that's what that slide is supposed to represent, through education and empathy, and we're creating community. So the goals of what we're doing is to change the attitudes of people, promote coexistence. Our best case scenario is animals not coming into care. In IWRC, so IWRC, which I should have said earlier, is the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council. We provide training and resources on wildlife rehabilitation. So our goal in this is to teach, share best practices, connect people from all around the world, and have them share their expertise, liaising and networking between rehabilitators and with the broader conservation communities. So I know the slide there isn't super visible, but it's just an example of best practices we do. So wildlife rehabilitation is a participatory approach. We are in contact with the public, with real people all the time. Wildlife rehabilitators promote dialogue, and we're promoting and using social learning. That's a key part. We want things to spread through the community. Wildlife rehabilitators positively impact interactions by providing context into the public-wildlife interactions, suggesting non-lethal, mutualistic resolutions. Often, these are participatory by the stakeholders in connection with the rehabilitators. They allow for community spread of understanding and reframing of the issues. Wildlife rehabilitators are really well placed in this work because often they're approached by the stakeholders. They're asked into the situation, and they're often part of the community with understanding of local human context and local animal behavior. Thank you, and excited to be able to talk to you today.
Thank you very much, Hank. Well, I certainly learned a lot about rehabilitators, so thank you. Any questions? So I had one, which was, so you put quite a lot of emphasis on the educational programs that you do. I was just wondering what sort of evaluation you then do of those educational programs. Do you sort of look at it in terms of the... I'm finished now. Yeah, it was just about how you evaluate your education programs.
Yeah, so a lot of it right now, I think that's an area that could have a lot more social science research on it. Right now, a lot of it is less formal in terms of spread of the community, in terms of either knowing that the wildlife rehabilitator in the area exists, or saying, oh, I heard from so-and-so who talked to so-and-so that this is what I should do when I find an animal. And then a lot of that trickles down into just seeing changes in what animals are coming into the center, what the circumstances are when they're coming in, and seeing change of, maybe less bird-caught rabbits or songbirds, or seeing people not calling when they see a Cooper's hawk at a bird feeder, or all sorts of different situations like that. So we do see actual change from it, but as far as I know, there's not been a lot of quantifying of how that works, which is interesting.
Maybe a link there.